Started. So just a little bit more about who we are. My name is Maria Collins, and I'm the head of acquisitions and discovery at North Carolina State University. Yan, I'll let you introduce yourself and your title.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I'm Xiaoyan. I'm the electronic resources librarian in the same department as Maria.
And we thought to get us started today, we're going to do a little bit more interaction at the beginning, if we can. Do a quick poll to determine if any of you all have ever used Python in your daily work. So Yan's going to activate that poll. And when you see it, just quickly note yes or no as to whether or not you've used Python before. All right, so it looks like 37% said yes, 63% said no. That's actually a decent percentage, I think, actually. And to sort of go along with that, I'm curious, if you said yes to the poll, just drop your job title in the chat so that we can see the kinds of positions that you hold if you've used Python before. All right, metadata analyst, librarian, systems, archival, metadata services, serials, cool, web services, cool, cataloging, e-resources. Okay, good. Yeah, it looks like we have a range of roles and positions that have used Python, and we saw a little bit of that in our data, our research data. So we'll be going over all that as well. So thanks everyone for your participation in the poll. So we'll go on and get started. Ian, the next slide. For today's presentation, Ian and I are going to talk about exploratory work we've undergone really over the last year related to the use of Python to support the work of technical services across a range of positions. We are also going to include some results from a more recent survey that we just sent out that is focused on staff that are situated directly in technical services. We hope this context is helpful to those of you in technical services that are considering growing this skill set. Next slide. We reached out to the community using both these surveys, and we also conducted several interviews to see what others are doing at their institutions. So by doing this, we hope to learn how Python was being used to assist with technical services work, who was using it in terms of what positions and departments, in what ways were organizations showing formal and or informal support for the work, and what resources were helpful for both learning and applying Python. Next slide. So I'd like to provide some context about NC State so that you can better understand our problem space and where we're coming from. So since 2005, which is when I joined NC State, technical services staff at our institution has shrunk by half. We currently have 22 positions in a single merged department that provides centralized support for all technical services functions. Our department has been able to keep up with a growing portfolio with a focus on creating efficiencies, including outsourcing where we can, automating as much as possible, and developing batch processes and workflows. So I know that we are not alone in this approach, and that many of you have also deployed these strategies to manage more with less. Next slide. So given the increasingly technical nature of the work in our department, we also reorganized and created a new unit called Data Projects and Partnerships, or as we like to call them, DPP. This unit provides lightweight technical support for the other two units in our department, including providing assistance with things like relational databases, assistance with reports, and providing ILS-related database maintenance support. DPP staff are learning to utilize OpenRefine, regular expressions, some programming languages such as Python, in order to write queries, join data, and create data workflow efficiencies. I'll be the first to admit that growing skill sets in this space has been challenging. Staff almost always begin with a problem to solve, and this was something that we saw in our interviews as well. But with limited knowledge and experience, they may struggle to determine the right skill or technology to use. In addition, staff are often left in a bit of a no man's land with minimal support as they learn something like Python in an informal and ad hoc way. So it gets into the need for training. Staff may find that they have to also continuously explain why use of a particular skill is valuable to justify training and access to tools and skills, or tools and systems. And this creates a lot of overhead and a need for constant negotiation on the manager's part. Some of this for us is organizational culture. Some of this is a reflection of a changing work environment. And since we see this area as growing, including for ERM spaces, we were interested in exploring further how these skill sets have been adapted and supported at other academic universities. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Yan, who will talk more about exploration of this space.
Thanks, Maria. We started the Python interest group in November 2019 with a goal to learn Python and to explore its application to our work. The initial thought was to help us learn in a supportive team environment through the cohort-based learning. Members were joined from different units in the department, including the DPP unit that Maria just talked about earlier. They are someone who does mark records, batch load, or other data-centric types of tasks, and who have an interest and aptitude to acquire the new skill. During the first year, the group met monthly and completed the Google's Python class. We have a link to this class on a later slide we'll share with you. After the first year's learning, some members in the group started applying Python to their day-to-day work. It was very encouraging and exciting to see these experimentations from the cohort learning group. Later on, people from other departments started to join us. And as of now, we have members in various positions, including catalogers, specialists centered around data work, data visualization librarians, digital technology development librarians, and a e-resource librarian, which is me, from different departments, including acquisition discovery, data visualization department, and also digital library department. So with the new members coming from different departments, these open up opportunities for collaboration and hopefully potential mentorship opportunities among the group. So while we were exploring the learning and applying Python to our work, we were curious whether and how other libraries use Python to support their technical work and what we can learn from them. So in 2021 spring, I had the opportunity to mentor a LRS intern, Sherry Shang from Simmons University. Sherry expressed interest in learning Python, learning more about Python. So as part of her internship project, she designed a survey to learn how other libraries are using Python. All right. So we conducted 2 surveys and a series of interviews over a 1-year period of time between July 2021 and October 2022 to learn how academic libraries use Python to support their technical service work. The first survey was sent to Code for Labeling survey in July 2021. We received 19 responses within 3 weeks. The survey contains 9 questions about people's experience using Python to support technical service work. Through the survey, we also collected interest in follow-up interviews for further discussion, and 11 people opted in for interviews. After the first survey, we conducted a series of interviews to learn how organization structure supports the Python work and learn more about people's experience. So we sent out interview invitations to those 11 people who opted in for interviews in September 2021. All of them graciously accepted the invitation. The interviews were conducted via Zoom, either in a group session or the individual session as a participant's choice. The interview questions contain 17 questions in 3 groups, including the Python experience, training and education, and the organizational structure. To gather data from the e-resource community, we sent out another survey in September and October this year to 3 additional listservs. which we anticipated to have more e-resource focused people. For this survey, some questions were repeated from the first survey and some were new, which we composed based on feedback from the first survey and the interviews. We received 27 responses in 3 weeks. For the next session, we will discuss the results from the 2 surveys and the interviews. So before we dive in, something just to keep in mind, due to the sample size, the survey and the interview result may not be statistically generalizable, but we do see some common themes that we'll highlight here. All right, let's start with the results regarding training and learning. To acquire Python skill, your first thought may be, oh, I need a computer science degree or something similar. It can be intimidating and discouraging. But we learned from our participant that to learn the skill, one thing to be assured, you don't need a computer science degree. Only 2 out of the 11 interview participants have a CS background, and everyone else, they just learn it on the job. Some participants are from a humanities background. One participant has an English language degree. Most people pick up the language through self-directed learning by taking some online training and or learning by solving the problem approach. Some people found active learning through solving problem is much more fun than by just taking an online course. Other people found intense training via boot camp or online courses help them learn it quickly. We see similar results from the second survey. None of the survey participants learned in formal education, learning in a formal education through undergrad or grad school. More than half, 60%, took Python workshops or courses in person or online. And then 41% of participants learned through the self-learning with no training at all. YouTube contributed to Python learning and 32% use YouTube for learning here. Library schools offer Python classes too, and 9% learned from library school. Other ways of learning include books and a conference presentation. Just to summarize here, Python is beginner friendly and you don't need a CS degree to learn Python. Online learning is a trend and it's easily accessible wherever you are and you can learn it at your own pace. Learning by doing it is a most effective way. So would people benefit from formal training with Python? The answer is depends on individual's learning style. Some may and others may not. Some interview participants pointed out that specific training focusing on library domain would be more useful than a general Python class. Library schools play an important role with formal training. Some people suggested library schools should offer classes in fundamentals of programming. They believe that learning the fundamentals is important for people to pick up any programming languages. If we have anyone working in library schools in the audience, this may be your takeaway from this session. As far as other things help with learning, to coach new hires or help others learn, mentorship was brought up by some interview participants. Although among all interview participants, no one was responsible for training others internally, except training a student or doing some instructions externally. The reason for that is they are the people that use Python in their department and they don't have anyone to train. Knowing command lines APIs are important to have before learning or beginning Python-related work. Other useful knowledge to have include Git, GitHub, regular expressions, and MarkEdit. And of course, any previous experience with programming language helps understand the flow and the structure. Participants also shared resources that they found useful for their Python learning and work. We have a slide later to share these resources with you. So we see many Python enthusiasts among the participants. Here's one from the second survey. I only just started this year, but I've been able to do a lot so far and would like to do more. This is very encouraging. We also see a rising interest and enthusiasm from our own department about Python since we started the Python interest group. When faced with learning something new, the main barrier is time. We heard about this from our interview participants and also survey participants. Just like the survey participant said here, the hardest part was learning the basics. I had to make time for that outside the work, and it took multiple weeks. It can be hard to convince fellow staff to make the effort, especially if they feel overworked already, and it's easier to just use Excel OpenRefine to do the same thing. This is a common challenge for all of us. We just have no time to learn, or there may be other tools that can get the work done. But remember, time is an investment. So one way to support staff learning, managers need to find ways to protect staff time for learning. So now let's switch gear to the Python use experience. We were interested in how long people have used Python, how often they use it, what type of work they do with Python, how the work is managed locally and shared with others. So how long have people used Python? This is a question we ask in both surveys. We see some general trends among all listservs, as well as difference in different communities. As this part charts, these two pie charts show here, over 60%, the slice in red here, from the Code for Lib, the first survey, have used it using the 5-year range. While for the same 5-year range, there are almost 50% participants from other listservs have used Python. And then less than 7%, the blue pie slice here from Code for Lib participants have started to use it within a year, and a bigger percentage, slightly over 30% from the other listserv falls into this category. In Code for Lib community, we know that over 1/3 of participants have used it for more than 5 years, the orange slice here. And then a smaller percentage, less than 20% from other listservs have used it for more than 5 years. So the difference between Code for Lib and other listservs are obvious here. And the reason is that the different type of members in these communities, Code for Lib has more developers than the other listservs we surveyed. So it makes sense to see the developer community have started to use Python earlier than the non-developer community. But the general trend among all the listservs is that Python has been picked up by academic libraries over the past several years. All right, how often people use Python is another question we ask in both surveys. We see a split between heavy users and light users across the board here. For Code for Lib, almost 1/3, which is the blue slice here, of the participants use it on a daily basis. Another 1/3, the red, use it on a weekly basis. And then 20% the orange here, at least once a month. And the 12% use it much less frequently, as less than once a month. For other listservs, the second pie down below here, we see the divide shifts a little bit, with the monthly users taking the largest pie piece, over 1/3 here. So the type of work that people use Python for covers a variety of library function areas, which includes acquisition, circulation, MARC records work, institutional repository, integration with system API, reports and data analysis, and other automation. Although the tasks are all different, the common theme is batch processing and automated a task to improve efficiency. The results from the second survey is consistent with what we saw from the previous survey and the interviews. Python is being used to support all sorts of library tasks, from batch processing, data cleanup, data extractions, API integrations, automating tasks, to data visualization, running reports, and web scraping. Regarding how Python work is managed, the experience is all unique for each participants and institutions. Librarians and supporting staff in various positions do Python work. Marie is going to talk more about this later. The user write code and use it themselves, or write for other people to use. This is observed in both surveys and interviews. Let's take a closer look at this. This graph shows the results from the second survey. We can see that majority of the participants, which is 82.6%, write script for their own work. A small but a significant percentage use script that others write for them. And then there are cases where people just get codes from other places, such as a vendor or on the open web. So we can see people are very resourceful when it comes to get the work done. As to the pipeline for work requests, some requests come through formal communication, such as ticketing systems. And then other requests that just come directly from their supervisors or sometimes colleagues from other units on campus. One thing in common though, regardless where the work requests come from, they are usually sent in as a problem. And it's up to the person who received the request to just decide what to use to solve the problem. And Python is one of the solutions. Both survey and interview participants also share that Python are often used jointly with other programs like APIs or programming languages such as Java, JavaScript, SQL, PHP, etc. Python is a versatile language which makes it widely used. To be a successful Python developer, you need to master other skills in order to Python itself. It may require a steeper learning curve to master all these skills. This can be more challenging to hire someone with many skills. As to how people manage Python script, many use GitHub to share codes with colleagues internally and externally. People found GitHub very useful because they had reused or adapted some Python codes written by other people in their GitHub repositories. Some use Google Colab to share with others, and some store code documentation on local machines or on internal documentation systems, such as Confluence Wiki. To make it easy for other people to understand and use the code, it's important to comment on the code. Before we get to the next section on Python examples, I wanted to share this quote from a survey participant, as I think it sums up nicely about learning Python, using it, and the importance of learning the skills. It really speaks a lot to me. So I'm going to pause here and give you half minutes maybe to read this. Now, to enlighten you on the variety of tasks and the people do with Python, we'll show some examples shared by survey and interview participants, as well as a couple projects from our departments. These are the examples from Code for Label participants. One example here is to use PyMark, a Python 3 library for working with bibliographic data encoded in Mark 21 to combine the OCLC metadata API to clean up bib records for re-import. Another example is to bulk edit a Mark record field across all the records that are not supported by local IIS function. And another example is doing batch searching against Gobi for lost item to to have them replaced. More examples from Code for Lib, batch update renewal dates and renewal periods for PO lines, transform data from one format to another one, creating plugin modules to integrate with Folio IIS, find the number of citation and the publications in combination with Scopus API and Python. And then the last one, clean up call numbers after RS integration. So here are some examples from additional listservs. Process the DDA records to standardize them, automate the running and distribution of various reports, and then process large data sets like mark records and a keyboard, find the current URLs from redirect, URL link checking, collection analysis, crosswalks between various formats, for example, from Excel to Mark or CSV to Mark and Mark to CSV, and cataloging quality control. With that, I'm going to pass to Maria to share more examples from NC State.
All right, I'm just going to provide just a few more examples of use of Python, mostly to give some visual examples. So next slide. The first example on the next slide actually represents work that Yan conducted in her role stewarding our ebook collections. So ebook collections in our libraries are acquired through a variety of models and programs with different license permissions for interlibrary loan, and they are contained in our suite of discovery systems. The challenge here is the ebook volume is big. Data files are large. We're talking about 167 megabyte Excel files, and manual processes can be cumbersome. So Yan created a Python script to munge the licenses and ebook data contained in various systems, process them, and then generate reports that are then sent to Rapid ILL. So automating these tasks reduces process time from hours to minutes. Next slide. This next example is our contribution from one of our specialists in our data projects and partnerships unit, Gabriel Israel. So every month, the Library of Congress releases changes and additions to LC classification numbers published to classweb.org. Most recently, the Library of Congress has begun releasing changed classification patterns for racial and ethnic group terms in response to pressure from the cataloging community to be more inclusive. So our library has an interest in tracking and implementing these changes locally. Gabriel explored how to process these monthly lists to be more readable using Python, and managed to filter down the monthly results from a web page into a spreadsheet of changed classifications that could be reviewed and implemented as appropriate. These examples are presented to help people think about and visualize the possibilities for using Python to support daily technical services work, but they're not meant to be prescriptive. Since Yan and I presented our findings at ERNL, the request that we've received the most is examples. People want examples to help them understand how Python might be used in their own context. So in addition, in our own conversations at State with administration, these kinds of examples have been helpful in illustrating the value of embedding these kinds of skills in a technical services environment. Next slide. In this next section, I'm going to review themes related to organizational support for Python work and technical services, and most of the content from this section was gathered from the interview sessions. Next slide. So in respect to the people interviewed who perform Python related work in the departments they represented, these include 4 systems librarians and library systems departments, 3 IT programmers, 1 archivist in a digital strategy unit, another archivist in a special collections technical services unit, 1 metadata and assessment librarian, and another metadata analyst both in technical services departments. So among all interview participants, only 3 positions were located directly in a traditional technical services department. In general, respondents from the first survey used Python to perform technical services work, but were not necessarily located in technical services departments. We suspect that the size of the institution is a significant factor in respect to the department location. So for instance, at one institution, which has 12 people in their cataloging department, the person doing Python work transitioned from a special language cataloger to a more technical position that supports batch processing, reports automation, and linked data projects. Her position remains in the cataloging department. Another institution, which is much smaller and only had 18 total staff for the entire library, has 2 positions that perform IT work, one of which was interviewed for this project. This person's position was also transformed from a cataloging position to take on more IT-related tasks, such as reporting, batch cleanup, and pulling data from various systems, such as Iliad and Alma. Next slide. So since the results from the first survey really focused on Python use to support technical services work, but not necessarily work performed by technical services staff, we wanted to do a follow-up with a second survey on the types of roles that are embedded in technical services that were also using Python to perform their work. So out of the 23 responses to this question, the top 3 technical services roles performing this kind of work included metadata librarian at 11 responses, cataloggers at 7 responses, and electronic resources librarians at 6 responses. Next slide. The previous slides provide 2 good examples of where traditional technical services positions were transformed to perform more technical work. So out of the 11 interviewees, 3 had transitioned to more technical roles. So we were interested in whether or not interviewees viewed this as a trend, as a potential trend. So responses were mixed. Some participants viewed this kind of transformation as a way forward. Others reported that libraries haven't planned to transform traditional technical services positions, as their library already had a strong system staff who support this kind of work. And one participant observed that these transitions may just happen organically through attrition as people retire. So in respect to including Python as a responsibility in the participant's position description, responses were also mixed depending on the participant's job titles. So 2 system librarians said Python is not specifically listed, but programming and reporting are part of the job description. The metadata analyst and the metadata librarian both commented that Python is not listed as required, but programming skills are expected and required. 2 archivists said Python was in the preferred category, and a couple of system librarians and a couple of programmers said Python was not originally listed, but revised and added to the list along with other languages. So when we asked participants whether or not they thought their departments would continue to hire someone with Python skills, we again received a mix of responses. Some indicated that the use of Python is a personal preference, and the knowledge of programming languages in general was acceptable. Another participant noted Python skills as preferred and commented that certain things would just slow down if a new hire did not have that skill. In general, use of Python in technical services was noted as a current trend. Next slide. Through the interviews and a literature review that we also conducted, there were several barriers or organizational concerns that came up. These included gatekeeping, or when there are others that determine your level of access or need for a particular skill. So one interview participant mentioned that they actually hid the fact that they used Python to assist with their work. Another barrier is imposter syndrome. During one interview discussion, a participant admitted that if Python had been listed in the job ad, they probably wouldn't have applied. This comment was made after they acknowledged how useful they found Python to be on the job. Another concern was the lack of formal acknowledgement of this skill, and this relates to acknowledgement that Python is useful for this kind of work and the lack of monetary compensation for this skill. Informal adoption of coding skills can result in a lack of systemic support where training and funding are up to the individual, or maybe on a case-by-case basis. Another concern was lack of knowledge by others in the library of the many transitions that have occurred in technical services. So an awareness of changes in the types of work that are performed. So potentially this could lead to a form of benign neglect where administrators are simply out of touch with the changing workforce. So these kinds of barriers and concerns reveal that it's simplistic to just ask a talented staff member to learn a new technical skill and apply it. There are management and infrastructure strategies that can be used to make this an easier path. Next slide. So given these barriers identified in our first round of explorations, we asked a follow-up question in our second survey specifically about the kinds of organizational support available to staff. So support included time for independent learning. We had 17 responses for that. Financial support for training, 8 responses. Structured training as part of the job, 2 responses, and acknowledgement through increased pay, also of 2 responses. So these responses from the second survey group match the feedback received from our earlier interviews. That support is mostly informal. We were glad and somewhat surprised to see even 2 responses from about the acknowledgement through increased pay. So in summary, the interviews and survey data revealed several takeaways. First, Python is useful for technical services work, especially for developing efficiencies and automating data workflows. Work assignments always began with a problem. Python was always mentioned as one of many possible solutions and often coincided with the use of other skills, SQL and APIs in particular. Python is an accessible coding language and an easy place to begin for non-programmers. Training is informal and support is often ad hoc. Many resources are available to assist with learning this language. Examples are abundant in the library literature. Use of Python was applied as a personal preference, and gatekeeping still exists in some organizations in terms of who is allowed to perform work using Python. Next slide. So how might we address some of these barriers? Next slide. The value of adding coding skills to the technical services toolbox are many. Knowledge of programming languages helps staff to more directly support their work at scale. This is especially important with the changing nature of technical services work and the decrease in technical services staff. Experience in this space also allows technical services staff to better communicate with technical stakeholders and other parts of the library, including system administrators and web team staff. And technical services staff will have a better understanding of problem spaces and more readily brainstorm and negotiate solutions. Next slide. So the use of Python or programming skills in technical services isn't in itself innovative. There are lots of examples of how Python can be used for technical services work. However, formalizing support for more technical skills building would be innovative. Formalized support would include 3 things: acknowledgement, support, and trust. And this might look like adding coding and scripting skills as a core skill or competency for performing technical services work, creating infrastructure to support training and growth, providing equitable access to resources and systems, providing equitable pay for evolving skills required for the job, and providing time for learning. At NC State, we hope to use much of what we've learned in this project to develop a curriculum, and we've already started working on what that curriculum would look like, and create a training course with technical services related examples that will help folks learn relational databases, open refine, regular expressions, Python, SQL, and at least some exposure to APIs. This will help us onboard our staff who have more of a technical focus in their job. We are also interested in continuing our support for cohort groups, such as the Python interest group that provide a support system throughout the learning journey. Both of these ideas could benefit from cross-institutional collaboration and crowdsourcing. Perhaps this is another potential path forward in which many of us can participate. And Ian and I also just recently participated with a group by, I believe, Dave Erdlinson that he's put together after he was working with some folks at Code for Lib. So I know that there are other groups that are available that are more, I guess, national in scope. Folks that have contacted us are hungry for examples and application and resources for training. We receive feedback about pushing forward ideas about organizational support for this kind of work as well. This was an acknowledged problem by many of the folks that we talked to. Related to this, I will share that one of the people that we had previously interviewed commented that he had already left his job in libraries. He noted that if he had been given the kind of formalized support that we noted in the previous slide, he probably would have stayed. So he is much better supported in his current new role. So this indicates a need to not only support growing skills in the space, but a need to improve efforts to retain talented staff who make these kinds of contributions. And we do hope to capture a lot of these concepts in an article too. Next slide. So you'll see here a short list of resources from the presentation, including a link to Python resources that were recommended by participants. So when you click on that link, you'll see all the different things that we got from the different surveys and our different interviews and that kind of stuff. You'll see a list of those things. Resources on the list range from classes, articles, instructional videos that go over things like techniques for using Python to automate, to best practices for coding in general, to more specific strategies for working with Mark. And we're happy to, these slides will be shared. I think this is being recorded, so you guys can reach out to us as well. Next slide. So I'd just like to end here with an acknowledgement to both the survey respondents and interviewees for their thoughtful participation, as well as our colleagues at NC State for their willingness to share the examples that they worked on. Next slide. And that's all we have for the presentation portion. So questions? You guys want to just put them in the chat, or I can see if there's any in the Q&A. I don't see a Q&A. Yeah, we'll definitely share the list of resources.
How receptive were higher ups to compensating people for learning a new skill like Python?
Yeah, so I think that was one of the complaints that people had, that they felt like that, especially because this is often informal or may not be directly listed in your position description, that there that was a struggle that different people had in their institutions. I will say at our institution, State, I see this problem holistically. You've got to learn the skill and you need to target positions that will use it. But you also need a management team that will work on rewriting position descriptions, rebanding, and doing those kinds of things to try to increase salaries. So that's part of what we're trying to do. I will say that when we've talked with our own administration and we've talked to them about examples, they needed, there was sort of this sort of notion that we were talking about big IT, when what we're really talking about is improving how we do our daily work. And so the examples were helpful, and like, yeah, this is someone's just solving this problem. Someone's just trying to curate this data. Someone's just trying to improve this workflow. And that helped too, with at least an understanding. But I think that that's something that folks need to work with in conjunction with their management team in order to move the needle on pay. Let's see, software library carpentry programs. I can let Yan talk to that one, but I know that in the interviews, a lot of people mention those programs and they're listed on the resource list. Yan, do you have anything else to add about that?
Yeah, so for our locally, there's classes from Jewish Academy. It's got a Python for librarians or something like that. I think it's on the resource list as well. So that is a program that several staff from our department took. And then of course the beginning courses we took is a Google's Python class. The reason we chose that just because it's Google thing and you can access it, and also they have some interactive like exercises and people can follow with learning. There are actually a lot of those online courses where providing exercises, hands-on experience for people to learn. Library carpentry, yes, there are. Those are the resources also recommended by participants. So the Google link, you should be able to see all of them there.
Any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any more in the chat. All right, Devin, I guess that means we're done.
Yeah, if folks don't have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Yan and Maria later. What we'll do is wrap things up. And folks, just keep an eye out for a follow-up email later today with the link to the recording survey and those slides as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody. Thanks so much, Jan and Maria.